Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts. Today is going to be a special little episode for those who are interested. For those who aren't, you're not going to watch this. So it's going to get probably very limited views, but it might be one of the most valuable episodes if you are curious about Cuban cigars, and especially if you're addicted to non-Cuban cigars. I've mentioned just a little bit of this in my cigars episode. There we go. As I smoke this beautiful H. Upman from Cuba. So cigars aren't for everyone. I'm going to recap just a little bit about cigars in general, just in case you're new. Because you could be interested in this and you've never smoked a cigar in your life and you're like, okay, wait a minute, I only have the basics here. I won't make you take the full prerequisite to get the good information on Cubans. But I'm going to dispel myths about New World cigars and dispel myths about Cuban cigars. It's mostly going to be dismissing the overall benefits of New World and dismiss the myths about how average or incidental Cuban cigars are. For those of you who get it, you're going to be enjoying this, hopefully. And probably potentially learning information about how to age your Cubans a little bit more. Now, the first thing that people think about, and if you're like me, you're taught that tobacco of any kind, when you smoke it, when you set it on fire and you pull some of the smoke into your mouth, you are going to die of cancer instantaneously. Well, in today's culture, I'm not sure you can even remotely track where one catches cancer. Curing it, well, go see my episode on cancer to hear several techniques that have worked extremely well for friends of mine and second-degree friends of mine. B17 vitamin being the most powerful one that has just utterly cleared out my friend's cancer, from stage 4 breast cancer to prostate cancer to just every form of cancer. It's amazing. But there's a lot of regimens you have to add to whatever you're doing. It's basically less is more. You won't lose your hair. You won't puke your guts out. And you'll be well, most likely. But there's a sad myth about cigars, which I bought up until probably, 2010. And that is that cigarettes and cigars have any similarity whatsoever. Now again, depending on your health, depending on your allergies to things, tobacco in general could be bad for you. So you need to do your own due diligence. I've had a CDC report shared with me that said that people that smoke cigars once a day has 6% less cancer than those who didn't smoke at all. Isn't that interesting? If that's true, it's related to stress. But a cigarette is not tobacco, is not tobacco, is not tobacco. Let me say it again. You think you're smoking tobacco, but you're smoking just a tiny, tiny amount of tobacco. They can't grow tobacco fast enough to supply cigarette smokers with tobacco. And so they made a thing out of paper and insulation from your ceiling to substitute for that problem. So when you get a cigarette, it's a white paper on the outside. Okay, well that's not tobacco. The filter isn't tobacco. And even though the filter seems like it's really strong and put together, you're sucking on 4 or 5 of these a day, or 20 of these a day, or 40 of these things a day, a 2-packer. You're sucking the particles from the filter down into your lungs, which shred your sacs, which are the little things that metabolize oxygen into your bloodstream. But the stuff inside, you're thinking, but the brown stuff's tobacco, right? No, the brown stuff is paper. You have this syrup that they create, which is full of an amazing amount of chemicals to give you the same toxic high. Okay, they give you a toxic high that a tobacco leaf burning in your mouth would give you naturally. And so you are burning all these chemicals. They're trying to, I guess, strain it out with a filter, but you can still buy Pall Mall Lucky Strike with no filters. And so that's why you die of cigarettes. Plus, major difference between cigars and cigarettes, you inhale cigarettes, you do not inhale cigars. If anybody's inhaling cigar, they're typically a former smoker, usually like a cigarette smoker, and they're a very heavy smoker, such that when they pull on one of these, they don't die. I know folks that smoke, 5 a day, 10 a day, and they can't take a single puff on one of these and let it go down their lungs because they will cough up their guts, okay? The Native Americans are the ones that conceived of this. The chiefs used to smoke, tons of this stuff. They lived ripe old ages, etc. Most of the celebrities in the world that got a chance to smoke anywhere from between 10, 15, and 20 cigars a day lived to be 100. Okay. So the only thing you need to be, a little careful with is that there's a law of particulates in the human body, which means don't inhale. A little bit inhale. Hey, we all hang out at campfires and we don't catch cancer. We ride trains and we don't catch cancer, So you can breathe a little bit in there. I just want to set that up so that you understand taxation against cigarettes that's immediately applied to cigars as a bunk argument. Okay? Now, for those in vaping, you got to be crazy. All the flavor chemicals are extremely bad for you, and you get, I think, 40% to 300% more tobacco in your system. So I don't know. And they inhale. So it's like a big kind of portable hookah, So just, keep that in mind. If you start feeling bad, back off any of your habits until you start feeling good, get an idea of what's going on. Now that the disclaimer's out of the way, Cuban cigars. There are Cuban cigars and there are New World cigars. New World cigars simply means it wasn't made in Cuba. That's all it means. A lot of families deserted Cuba and took the seeds and moved them to South America, the continent, Nicaragua, Dominican Republic. But they grow tobacco all over the world, don't they? We grow a bunch in the Americas, but they grow it everywhere. In Indonesia, Malaysia, China, I think even Africa. Wherever you can make a crop happen, they'll grow the rugged crop, which is tobacco. But not all tobacco's equal. The shape and the island alone in Cuba gives Cuban tobacco an advantage if you know what you're looking for. Within Cuba, you have tons of farms growing Cuban tobacco, and most of it's all harvested together, and all cigars are crafted out of the various tastes of the Cuban tobacco that's there. And you should know that in Cuba, an average citizen like myself could grow a backyard full of tobacco. I could harvest it and sell it directly to one of the state centers. So just like Americans take all of their recycling and go to recycling centers to get paid, same thing goes for the Cuban tobacco that is not grown by the big growers, because there's gigantic growers. But even within Cuba, there's a specialty. When Fidel Castro gained control over Cuba in the early 60s, he was obviously a cigar enthusiast. The average amount of cigars that he is rumored to smoke a day is about 18. And again, he almost made it to 100, folks. But he had commissioned a cigar called the Cohiba. Cohiba is the most highly counterfeited cigar in the world. I have probably seen as many counterfeits as I have seen legitimate cigars, legitimate Cohibas, I should say. And there are Cohibas, black band Cohibas, which are utter floor slop. That's not the same thing. If your Cohiba isn't costing you $30 American, you're probably nowhere close to a real Cohiba. Although counterfeits will sell all the time for $75 and that kind of thing. You want to get the box, crack it open, look at the serial numbers on the outside. We'll get to all that stuff. But the farms that grow Cohiba tobacco are not shared with any of the other cigars. So that in itself is why it is the most premium, considered one of the most premium cigars out there. They're well constructed, they're beautiful, and they taste great. Now, New Worlds, again, could be made from anywhere. They could have any quality of tobacco. But here's the thing. Yours truly started out with New World cigars, as almost every single person in America has to, because we've got this beef with Castro. Old white guys have a beef with Castro. Europe and the rest of the world is not in this demented grudge-holding fucking game, and so they can all start off with Cubans. What's interesting about being an American and starting off in a New World stash, and again, there's thousands and thousands of New World cigars, because anybody who's not Cuban, growing it and harvesting it in Cuba, it's not Cuban, right? The amount of cigars in the New World realm that taste anything like a Cuban, you could probably count on one hand. And it's only a hint of what Cuban cigars taste like. But now what's interesting is in America, you have this crazy hatred for Cuban cigars by people who, guess what? They've never smoked a Cuban in their life, or they've puffed on one. New World cigars tend to mount to like a sledgehammer in your face, usually. They are not necessarily poorly made by any stretch of the imagination. They're not made of bad tobacco. It's just the taste profiles are very loud in a lot of cases. Now, a lot of times it's difficult to tell people the difference between the New World and the Cuban smoke. But having just told you it was very loud smoke, now they make Macanudos and that kind of stuff that's very, very light. A lot of people call it air, because you smoke this cigar and it's so light that you don't really get the sense that you're smoking a cigar until maybe the very end. But most people have been inundated their entire life with the concept of wine and perhaps champagne. Wines, champagnes, and liquors, I should say, too. But wines especially. Where you get your grapes makes a big difference, right? How those grapes are prepared, how they are stored, whether they're stored in wood barrels or kind of half and half aluminum wood barrels, all aluminum, whether or not the barrel was on the edge of the warehouse versus the center. It all makes a difference, right? Then when it's finally bottled, how the bottle is stored, what temperatures it's stored at. And there's a million religions around that whole thing. The craftsmanship of any cigar in the world that is not, I would say, machine-made, and there's some great machine-made cigars out there, let me tell you, especially on the Cuban side. It's as meticulous as wine, if not 3 or 4 times more intense than wine. I was told, and I believe this is very true because I've heard it from multiple sources, the number only goes up, that the average $5 cigar still has an average of about 300 people that have touched the tobacco and moved it before you get a chance to light it on fire and put it in your mouth. Now, perhaps for a Cohiba or something very special and eclectic, maybe the number goes down a little bit, but then you're talking about the crafters, the blenders, and those that contribute to its construction are probably the best in the world. So, it's like having 1,000 Ford Motor Company mechanics touch your car, or, a dozen Lamborghini guys touch your car. It's a little bit different, right? But here's what I have discovered. When you get into New World cigars, you are talking about drastically different taste profiles, almost an out-of-control mechanism of trying to control strength versus body, meaning strength is how powerful the cigar hits you and displaces your blood sugar levels, whereas body is the taste. That's what everyone's going for. They're trying to figure out, whether or not the cigar is one-dimensional, meaning from the second you light it to the second you finish it, it's the same exact taste all the way down, which is technically almost impossible. I think a Macanudo pulls that off pretty good. But then you have the fact that the tip has been open for a while, depending on how it was stored. And so the first inch or so is usually a little dry, a little ashy. And then as soon as you get to the center point, you're getting the master blend. Whoever designed this cigar, that's exactly the taste they wanted you to have. As you move down close to the band, you start getting the cherry, the fire starts getting close. Everything starts heating up, and you can get some fairly intense, sort of syrupy, tar, intense flavors, and that's where you get all of your strength. If there's going to be strength in the cigar, it's going to be down towards the bottom here. But what I had was, probably about 4 or 5 years of smoking New World cigars and enjoying myself, right? Because I didn't know any better. There are people on YouTube that are famous for reviewing New World cigars. I had a show. There's still like 6 or 7 videos up there. It's called a Real-Time Cigar Review. I'm reviewing New World cigars. But the more I hung out in cigar lounges and talked to people that smoked, I realized that my opinion is really of little value to anyone because all of our taste buds are different. But you have folks that are New World cigar buffs. I mean, they'll smoke a JR $2.50 cigar all the way up to maybe a $100 overhyped New World cigar. And anytime someone mentions Cuban cigars, they take a big shit on them. Now, some of the times they take craps on Cubans because they can't get them, and so you hate what you can't have. That way you have no problem sleeping at night, I guess, hugging your pillow. The second reason that I think people crap on Cubans is that they're used to the big, giant, loud flavors in their mouth, the $2 chucks, if you will. And when they drink a fine wine or eat some fine food, they can't taste it as much because their taste buds are so just abused by New World cigars that it doesn't make an impression. Now, I will say that one thing that does occur with at least men, I've never heard a woman admit this, but my men in my family have said this, that as you get older, you can get to a point where your taste buds and your smell just simply vanishes. About 75 or so, you'll just eat texture. I really hope that doesn't happen for me, but it might. In that particular exclusive case, if you had a milder cigar, it might not register at all, in the system. You know that guys will like spicier food the older that they get because their taste buds, one, you get tired of all the other sugary crap, but you appreciate that rush of spice and maybe your adrenaline that pops into your bloodstream as a result of feeling like you might be dying. You will also have folks that incubate ignorance on a level that's just unbelievable with cigars. It is almost like the heretic days of, accusing people of being witches and taking them out and killing them. And I'm just going to throw this in there before we jump into all the details on the Cuban side. The 2 giant myths about cigars in general that I see guys just shit all over themselves. They feel like they're major cigar experts. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you know anyone who's against these 2 things, you're dealing with a rookie of mammoth proportions. Okay? No matter what they've said about cigars, up to the point of pissing themselves on these 2 issues, you can just subtract it out of your life just to get rid of all of their advice because they don't know what the fuck they're talking about and they're unable to think for themselves, basically, right? One is that there is it's really funny. It's only a big concern, I think, because there's 2 sides of this game. There's something called mold and there's something called plume. And they get often confused. A moldy cigar is, if you've seen mold in your life, it's usually very dark, it's very green, and it starts to consume the cigar. Like if you got some mold right here, it'll start digging into the cigar. It's a living organism, right? And then there's plume, which is a powdery white dust that you will get on your cigars. And those that are in the know will look for plume and consider that a benefit, and they'll avoid mold. And only because the mold destroys the actual cigar. It destroys the integrity. It'll break your wrapper, and you'll be smoking, and a bunch of smoke's coming out the middle of your cigar. But guys will get online and see plume and call it mold all the time. And again, you can just wipe plume off if it's really bothering you, right? I've never heard of anyone getting remotely sick from plume, ever. Like, I was fine, and then I touched the plume, and I turned into a pod, and I came out, and I was, it was a body snatcher or something, right? Complete fucking bullshit, right? But regardless, you're going to burn it. You're going to burn it and ingest the byproduct of the tobacco, which is going to be 99.9% of whatever happens, depending on how much mold you have in your cigar. Again, I don't smoke moldy cigars. I don't buy moldy cigars. I've never known anyone besides a gas station or kind of a convenience store that sells them that have ever seen mold. Pictures of it online. So plume, hey, if it bothers you, just wipe it off and smoke it, right? I see guys with $100 cigars throw it away because some douchebag online has got a show who freaks everybody out about it. Okay, you got my point. The second one is dying off slowly. But again, if you've been following a guy on YouTube that tells you that the second one is bad, again, you're dealing with the rookie. Why fill up your life with those people? Why listen to them? Even if they're extremely articulate, and we'll get to that in a second. But the other one is if you age a cigar, or you have a cigar that looks like it's fairly dehydrated, but you touch it and you squeeze it and it's okay, but it's just like, wow, the wrapper's really fragile on this thing. I need to make sure that when I punch it, when I cut it, it doesn't explode. When you smoke, you don't want the wrapper to unravel, that kind of stuff. And it has to do with what my buddy and I are now dubbing called baptizing a cigar. Some people call it dunking. What you do is you take the cigar before you cut the top off, right? So it's all sealed up nice. You run some faucet water, hopefully filtered if you can do it. And, get the water to go straight down. Not some gigantic tidal wave, okay? Just enough to create a nice little stream. But you take your cigar, you put it under the water, hold it there for 6 seconds. And then you pull it out. Then you turn the water off, and you go to wherever the hell you're going to smoke your cigar. Give it about 60 seconds before you start plowing into the thing, opening it up, and a couple things will dawn on you very quickly. Within 60 seconds, your cigar is pretty much dry. Maybe a couple little specks here and there. But you also know that the wrapper totally came alive. It totally hydrated. It's beautiful. I'm almost at a point where I could dunk every single cigar that I have, But you have guys online that know fuck all about cigars, but they really want to put off the vibe that they know about cigars. And they'll take shits on this whole technique. And they'll say that you're destroying the cigar. That's the dumb fuckery proof that whoever you're listening to has no concept of basic physics or anything, right? Now, what did I just do? I put the end of the cigar into my mouth. Well, I don't know about you, but even on a dry day, anything I put in my mouth gets wet, all right? Hold the jokes for later. So, by the time I get done with this cigar, and any cigar that I smoke, the first half inch of this cigar is going to be soaking wet. Why? Because I put it in my mouth every time I pull on it, right? A little bit different than a cigarette, because cigarettes are lit, gone within, a few minutes. Cigar is going to last you, hopefully, an hour to 2.5 hours, depending on what you're smoking and how much you feel like you got to pound the thing. If you just came out of rush hour traffic, it probably goes down to about 45 minutes. But I've smoked nearly 40-year-old cigars. I've watched my buddy smoke nearly 100-year-old cigars, aged Cubans. And these are the techniques that the experts of the world use. When you light the stick after you baptize it, you will notice it's super rich and beautiful. If you were to take one that was baptized and one that wasn't, and you do this, this one is the one that wasn't baptized is extremely dry. Sorry for those on podcast. I always forget you can't see my hands. But it brings it back to life, and it's a beautiful thing. And what's interesting is, it's like, I hate to do this to you guys, but I get the analogy of people that are against guns. 99.999% of the time, anybody who's pissing and moaning about a Second Amendment to protect the First, you go, have you shot a gun? No, they're dumb, and no one should ever shoot guns. Oh, okay, you big pussy. So you hate something you've never tried. Yeah, I suppose you hate a bunch of food you've never tried too, right? Hey, could someone get this fucking little kid out of here? You know, we're trying to run a country, so the big boys are here, right? Same thing goes for cigars in general. These stupid little rules that people put together so they could be faux experts is hilarious, right? Take a poop and relax, okay? But why do people smoke cigars in general? Well, there's two factors to it typically. For the personal self. The social element's off the chain, you know, like you meet people and have, you know, you'll just build lifelong friendships in cigar lounges or other places where people smoke. But the personal reasons are typically the blood sugar level adjustment, so it calms you down, you know, if you're a little stressed out. And the second one is the taste. And I know, ladies, those of you who do not smoke cigars, or you never smoked cigarettes or what have you, or anyone who hasn't experienced that, you hear this taste thing and you're like, oh, right, yeah, because your breath smells awesome after you smoke a cigar. It is a very weird thing that if I sit next to an ashtray full of cigar ashes, I got to go throw it out, because the pungent ash smell from the remnants of a cigar is gross to me. It's just so disturbing to my presence, right? When I do smell someone else's breath and I haven't smoked from cigars, it's gross. It's weird. The ashy smell that you have on your body after you smoke is really odd. Sometimes it can be okay, sometimes not. Cubans, it's a little bit better in my opinion. But you know, when we taste a cigar, I mean, the way I learned how to taste is actually pretty effective. There's two sides to it. You take a puff and you slowly let the smoke fall out of your mouth. Now with Cubans, you get a whole different thing going on. The other one is to retrohale through your nose. Now with New World cigars, because they are so loud and so young and immature, in my opinion, because they're hardly ever aged, it's like being dunked underwater when you do a retro. You know, that burny nose feeling? Horrible. With a Cuban that has been aged 5 years or more, again, we're going to get into aging in a second here, you're dealing with the finest tobacco flavors that you could possibly isolate. And so retro creates just an absolute kaleidoscope of flavors and almost fourth dimensional experience. I mean, you'll sort of journey throughout the universe when you're doing this, or you go right to where they harvested the tobacco in the first place. I know it sounds a little strange, but I've smoked tons of New Worlds and never really had any religious experiences, you know, with the taste. It's kind of like, oh yeah, that's pretty good, that's all right. And then you'll get into a Cuban, just like an average Cuban that's 5 years old or so. I smoked a 4-year-old Cuban the other day that was as good as a 20-year-old Cuban. It was just phenomenal. So sometimes you just get a perfect batch, right? But when you taste a cigar, or pretty much anything, but a cigar is an amazing thing. You actually have, if you pay attention, a chronology of how your body is registering the flavor. So you have the walls of your mouth, you got your tongue, and then you have your nasal canal that is all contributing to a dimensional experience in your brain. Now this sounds a little bit heavy, but once you think this through and then you have the experience, you will be on another level with folks. That's why I want to do this episode. How many of you are familiar with amputees feeling phantom pain? They've lost a finger, a leg, an arm, or whatever, but they still feel the limb there. And it takes a long time to educate the brain that it's not there anymore, right? Some people claim they feel it for the rest of their lives, right? Well, when you do have your body, especially your taste buds and your nose, your brain is creating a three-dimensional image inside of your soul, whatever the hell we are made out of the information that's coming in a dimensional sort of hologram inside your senses, inside your mind, inside your little Malkovich room in there. So when you pull in smoke from a Cuban especially, And again, Cuban, we are going to be dealing with super fine brush strokes in the painting. Your New World cigars is kind of like, you're like 2 or 3 months old, you can barely hold your head up, and you got a big brush, and you're just doing bam shit to a canvas. That's a New World cigar. It's not the end of the world that that's the way it is, but it is truly drawing with the crayons that have the flat side on them, right? In order to get to this stage, before I totally dive down into this more existential side of the taste buds, the way I talk to folks that come in to buy cigars at my buddy's shop is I say, look, if you've been smoking New Worlds forever and you want to go find yourself a Cuban with somebody, you need to understand that you're probably going to need a few days off of the New Worlds, because you're going to be so maladjusted to very super loud flavors that in order for you to even taste the basic splendor of a Cuban, you're going to have to wash that out, Again, it would be if you're kind of a binge drinker and you only drink vodka brand vodka, and I hand you a $300 bottle of wine or champagne, and I'm saying, okay, slow down. This is, $30 a glass, okay? Take your time. Now, just sip a little bit, smell it. Smell it in your nose and let it come out of your mouth before you even drink it. It's going to take a while to come off that Coors Light regiment to get over to like a Rothschild wine of some sort, right? Same thing with a cigar going from New World to Cuban. You got to pull out so that you can understand the brilliance of what's going on here. One of the things that I think is strange, and it's not always the case because there's a lot of perversion out there, but a lot of really good people who are very wealthy and very smart, when they gravitate away from what the public likes, I'm always interested. I'm always like, I'm not like, I don't have to join some fucking Eyes Wide Shut party. But, it's like fine dining. Well, what do you think is fine dining? Maybe they're completely full of crap. But a lot of times you'll find out that, oh, yeah, they've been through the swill. Or maybe they've avoided the swill their entire life and they eat the finest stuff in the world. For me, a Cuban cigar is right up at that level, right? So you're going to have a bunch of flavors that come out of your mouth. And you're going to have a bunch of flavors that you can add by doing a little bit of retro out your nose, which is essentially you pull in the cloud, you do not inhale, and then you just breathe out your nose, and it'll all go straight out your nose. Take your time on that one, because a big giant cloud of smoke can burn a little bit at first. So you can just let little tiny puffs out of your nose. The other technique that I absolutely love with Cubans is when I'm letting it out of my mouth, and those of you who smoke weed, you see this all the time on album covers, let a little bit in your nose. So just little puffy smells. And you will get this incredible three-dimensional sampling. Your mouth, your nose, and then your mouth to your nose. It's very interesting. I have not found it rewarding in the slightest to do all three with any New World cigar. Probably the most expensive New World cigar I've ever smoked is $80, right? I've smoked a Davidoff from Cuba in the late 80s. Cost me $300. It wasn't worth it. No matter how good Cuban cigars are, it just wasn't worth it. The other nice thing about Cuban cigars is that you can pretty much close your eyes and pick up any stick that has the body and the strength that you're looking for. Now, I don't know anyone on planet Earth that wants zero body. Okay, everybody wants 100% body, which is flavor. When it comes to strength, you'll have folks that are, mild, medium, and heavy, right? You just got to figure out for yourself. It usually has to do with your body size. But I know little pipsqueaks that just love sticks that would put me on my back. I'm just not into it. Now, again, if you're brand new to cigars and you're watching this episode, if you ever get sick smoking a cigar, just bring some candy with you, some chocolate or something, or drink a soda. You just need a little bit of sugar in your system. Within a minute, 60 seconds, you should be okay. So don't let that get you. And if you are having that issue, you either have one of two things you're doing that you may want to be careful with. One, you've got a heavy cigar in the strength realm, and you probably shouldn't buy that stick again. Whoever you're buying it from, you just say, look, man, I'm not interested in strength, just body. The other one is you could have sort of a medium strength cigar but you're puffing too fast. So you're just inundating your saliva with the tobacco, which then goes into your bloodstream and starts to make it be a little oozy, right? Now, you hear a lot of weird rumors about aging cigars. And I'm going to link to my one of my best friends on the planet, Dave, who calls himself The Dude as well. We created 2 shows on YouTube and called ourselves The Dude. And we got together and high-fived. But he is I think, a world expert in Cubans. And I mean, he's just a guy who does videos in 2 locations. He lives in 2 different places. But I think that one of the... I have to leave this name out for reasons, but probably one of the most celebrated Cuban experts by the rest of the world thinks that his palate, my buddy's palate, is one of the best in the planet. And they work together all the time. Let's put it that way. So when you're watching his videos, if you're interested in Cubans, he is a master at this stuff. And I mean, he studies Cuban cigars like Hawking studied bullshit theoretical physics, right? I mean, he really gets into it. Except my buddy's correct in his assessments. But one of the things that comes around is aging cigars. With New World, I don't know if there's a hell of a lot of reason to get past maybe 5 or 10 years. Typically what happens is you get a cigar, and just like a wine, it has tannins in it, which can make it kind of sour and kind of heavy, right? And the more that you age it, these things calm down and neutralize completely out of the cigar. But you have to follow some special rules when you're actually doing the aging process. In a nutshell, you have temperature and humidity, RH, relative humidity, which is the humidity within the device of which you're actually humidifying these things. There have been, and there are humidors around the world, cigar shops around the world, where people store millions of dollars worth of cigars of their clients and of their own stock, and they age them just like wine, except in the cigar realm, they don't make the cigar. It's an interesting thing. Imagine me buying a ton of wine off some vineyard in Northern California, and then I hang on to it, I age it, and then I sell it. You know, this happens, especially on Rodeo Drive. But with cigars, it's the same way. So they buy all these Cuban cigars, then they age them for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And of course, the price just goes up and up because the stick is now this priceless experience that you had to wait 30 years to have this taste happen inside your system. I don't know of any New World cigar that can last that long and actually have this experience. Maybe there is, but they never make it that far, do they? Because they're cheapy little sticks, right? So you'll read some articles or you'll watch some videos online that say you can't age a cigar beyond 10 years. Beyond 10 years, it's completely pointless. The stick turns into basically paper. And that is one of the critiques that you will find from someone who is New Worlding and Cuban swapping within a single day. So they're blowing out all their taste buds with this New World thing, and then they're trying to appreciate a fine wine. It doesn't work that way. You got to, get off one and move to the other for several days and then change, right? Now, full disclosure, I can smoke a New World on a Saturday and smoke a Cuban on a Sunday and get all the beauty of it, right? But then I'm slowing down my mind and realizing, what I'm looking for here. And you can do exactly the same thing. What happens with aging cigars, and we'll get into temperature and humidification in a second, is that you're allowing the inside of the cigar to ferment, right? Cigars ferment just like wine. And they get stronger and stronger as they ferment, and then they calm down. Well, there's a weird roller coaster ride that can happen on a cigar where you might age a cigar 5 years, smoke one out of your box and go, yuck, It won't be like that, but I mean, it'll just be like, okay, I don't really feel the big difference in this. And then you'll let that box go another 5 years, pick another stick up, smoke it, and be like, oh, wow, that's amazing. That's exactly what I'm looking for. But then you hold on to it for another 5 years, take a stick out, and you're like, these are great, dude, have one. And you're both going, whoa, what happened? You think your box is screwed. But you wait another 5 years. Now it's at a 20-year mark. Boom, it blows up again. Now it's not 5-10, 5-10, but there are these cycles where it will get sour, and then it will get totally mild and awesome, and then it can get sour again. I think most of the time cigars that are aged past the sweet point typically continue to ride out that sweet point for a really, really long time. Now you can get cigars that are made in the pre-embargo Cuban 1940s that are mind blowers, and you can get one that's just paper that has nothing to it. It just depends on how it was stored and the tobacco of the year it was rolled. When you're a kid, you're told that wine aged is better. And then you get older and you start seeing these auctions at Tiffany's of someone auctioning off a 400-year-old bottle of wine. And when you're young and you see that, you're like, oh my God, when they open that $400 or 400-year bottle of wine and drink it, it must be amazing. And then you find out most wine connoisseurs know it's just swill inside. After 400 years, whatever was in there, so you're just buying an interesting relic from time. So far, we don't have aged cigars that are 400 years old. But again, my buddy has smoked one that's at least 100 years old, and he's had some pretty amazing experiences. But the more you understand the families that put these cigars together, you will have more than just the taste in your mind. You'll have this history in your head, right? But okay, you know what we do with food, right? We put food in the refrigerator to slow down the aging process on food, to keep it for a lot longer. Well, cigars are exactly the same way. The hotter a cigar is, the more it's going to rapidly ferment and age. Humidification is an augmentation of that aging process as it relates to heat. So hot and moist is going to age something a lot faster than colder and moist or colder and less moist, right? So there is a family, and the name's going to escape me here. Starts with an S. I don't want to say it wrong. I'll link my buddy's video in here so you can see the interview with the gentleman who discovered it. But it was a father-son duo. The father had actually figured out a way to age Cuban cigars in a way that he paralyzed in sort of stasis mode the cigar's aging velocity, so he can keep them for a lot longer. It also turned out that this process started creating combinations, chemical combinations in the cigar that make them taste amazing. Now, I'm going to give you some centigrades because this is how they do it in Europe, where this was actually invented. The optimal temperature for a long-term storage is about 12 degrees Celsius. 10 to 12, somewhere in there. I think 10 degrees Celsius is 50 degrees Fahrenheit, because that gives you a little bit of an idea. A lot of humidors, like my buddy's humidor, he can't get it below 14 degrees Celsius, which I think is about 59 degrees. But still, it's pretty cool. On the humidification side, you bring down humidity to below 70. Usually can store it at somewhere in the mid-60s. Again, see my buddy's video for the details on this, which I'll link below. But you store it like that, and it starts to slow things down. It also gets rid of any bugs that are inside the cigar, because you have these little weasel bugs that get in there, and they will burrow holes in the cigar. And when you start smoking it, it's like a cartoon, right? You puff it, and it's like smoke's coming out everywhere. The cigar is gone. So these little beetles that sometimes get in the cigars, I think it's more rare than anything. It paralyzes their growth because it's too cold for them. There's not enough moisture for them, and they die. Now you hear that factories will actually freeze the cigars right after they make them to make sure that if there's any bugs in there, any mold of any kind, that it gets paralyzed to death, and that way there's no damage to the cigar, and when they warm it back up and ship it out, it's ready to go. Now, don't try this at home until you've really studied how to do the freezing thing, because you could... I've had a buddy of mine who destroyed a whole batch of cigars by putting them in his freezer, and I'm not sure he did anything other than just put them in his freezer, and they turn into old ice cream, all the crystallization, right? But when you want to migrate it out of long-term storage to the point you're going to smoke it, they raise the temperature and they raise the humidity to like 72% humidity. Not quite sure. I think it's room temperature. Yeah, it's room temperature on the temperature side of things. And they let it sit to 4 to 6 weeks before they smoke it. Just allow it to kind of grow back into this reality. It's sort of like all those sci-fi movies when people come out of stasis. They're kind of groggy, right? You got to give a cigar 4 to 6 weeks before you start puffing on it. Now, before you think this is hocus pocus, you have folks like my buddy who have taken one out of cold storage, taken one out of this cold storage to warm process, and then one that's been sitting there at room temperature the entire time. And he will smoke between them to figure out whether or not there's a flavor profile difference, and do it with other connoisseurs and say, what do you think? And they have unanimously come back and said, wow, this one that was cold that you allowed to warm back up, the taste is measurably above the other cigars. All Cuban, of course, right? Now, what I've noticed with cigars, and a lot of things that people enjoy, is that they just simply love cigars so much that it doesn't really matter the state of the cigar for them to totally get off smoking it. And for a person like that, you obviously want to celebrate their love for the stick, but at the same time, you want to be a little bit careful about where you get advice from, obviously, because you don't want to mess up, some vintage cigar that you have. So if you're a person who absolutely loves something, then a lot of this meticulous aging is not something you're concerned about, because you could pick up a $3 stick and just be like in heaven, right? God bless you. You're lucky. Once I got bit by the aged Cuban, it made everything else pale in comparison. I smoke No Worlds now simply to rotate my palate through different flavors, such that when I get back to an aged Cuban, it's, bellissimo, right? So what are some of the flavor differences? I've been ranting here for a long time here. So with a Cuban, you're going to get, for the younger Cubans, this is a very young, non-aged Cuban here, you're going to get hay, a distinct leather tobacco, and usually on a young one, that's about it. But it's a very subtle, amazing thing. And the quality of those flavors will vary depending on the humidification of the cigar. So if you have a nicely humidified cigar, for instance, you will, for any of you who, grew up anywhere near the Midwest or a saddle on a horse, that's what I always think of every time I smoke a good Cuban. You will have a saddle that is old and worn. It was polished at one time. It was all nice and lacquered up, real nice. But this one's been ridden by Grandpa for 30 years, and it's all it's like suede. But it wasn't suede when it was originally made, right? So that's what a young Cuban reminds me of, is sort of that worn-in flavor. And it's not bad at all. It's a great nostalgic thing. The properly humidified Cuban will have more of that supple, just beautiful in its peak leather. It's not brand new cellophane wrapped leather. It's a nice sort of just absolutely manicured, perfect flavor that you'll get. Again, it's subtle. But the biggest flavor that I think that people miss, and it took me a while to understand it, is something that I think a genius, Min Ron Ni, he's a Chinese man who lives in Hong Kong. He wrote the only real book that's been endorsed by the Cuban government on all the Cuban cigars. He's been working on the second edition, which the first book is a book, and the second edition is supposed to be a ton of books. So we'll see if he gets that out the door. But he, I think, was the one that coined the phrase medicinal. Now, this is going to sound weird, but they will say this one has a strong medicinal flavor. Now, medicinal shows up in something that's at least 4 to 5 years old. About 4 or 5 years old, you'll start getting the hint of this medicinal thing, and I'll try to do my best to describe it. 10 years, 15, 20 years, ooh, you start getting massive medicinal flavor. Now, what the hell is medicinal? Doesn't that sound awful? The best way for me to describe medicinal flavor is that, again, if you think about what I was saying about the three-dimensional image that you get in your brain when you're blowing out smoke, and smoke has an extremely unique texture, right? It's not like eating pudding or a strawberry shortcake or your favorite lasagna. That's all over the place, splatting around inside your mouth, and your brain can't really create an image of it because it's just like that's the slap in your face that's making you have this feeling. With a cloud of smoke, again, you will blow it out and it will literally chronologically coat the side of your mouth out the door. It'll go up your nasal canal, strike your nose, follicles that contribute to your taste, and then go out your nose. And then if you keep rotating this in and out, you have all this amazing detail that you can get out of these flavors, right? But smoke has usually one profile that in different places in your nasal canal and your mouth will give you different flavors. And again, mine are different than yours, so it's hard for me to tell you. But I've sat in a room enough that I now can tell you that there's some definite commonalities between two human beings. Now, my buddy Dave and I, we have very similar taste palates, and so he will say something and I'm like, oh my god, yeah, it's that, and vice versa, right? The medicinal thing is sort of like those Easter eggs you used to get when you were a kid with candy in them, like random crap in them. The medicinal bubble that you'll get inside your smoke is sort of an extra little dimension. You're still going to get your hay, you're still going to get your leather tobacco flavors, but inside the medicinal thing, you will have what at first will seem like a medicine, weird medicine flavor. Again, who the hell likes medicine flavors? When rolled up inside this, it turns into what we call the bean. Now, the first couple months I was smoking with my buddy, he'd say, oh, there's that beanie flavor in there. And I'm thinking, beans? Like, I think refried beans, bean salad, like, last thing I want to taste in a cigar is a bean. He's like, oh, no. It's not like that. It's like a vanilla bean, a sweetness. And as soon as he said that, I was like, because I'm a huge vanilla fan, there was this epiphany. The medicinal flavor is typically sort of this interesting sweet bubble that you can parse depending on how you exhale. So if you just take a big puff and blow it out really fast, which is a lot of New World smokers, why hold in a average cloud of smoke, right? It's no big deal. But if you take in an aged Cuban, 10 years or above, and it's got that medicinal thing to it, which almost all of them do, you can take that medicinal flavor. One, you don't have to puff so much smoke in because then you can study it and have this flavor. But I don't know if any of you have eaten a quail egg on a sushi or something like that. I know it sounds gross, but it's actually awesome. You pop it on the roof of your mouth. There's no taste to it at all. It's just like silk. It's like a honey silk. It's amazing. Same thing happens with a medicinal cloud, is that you rotate it out your nose, you rotate it in your mouth, vice versa. And so you have all these different techniques of actually tasting the same exact thing, and you'll realize so much about your taste buds that when you transition to food or drink in any other realm, you are so much more educated about how your body tastes things, right? Now, sometimes that sweetness inside of the medicinal bubble has like a fig Newton, like that sweet fig Newton cookie. You will also get sometimes black licorice. When I smoke I forgot the name of them, those Italian cigars that Clint Eastwood smoked, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. They're actually room temperature cigars. You don't have to store them in humidification. They're tapered at both ends. They're really long, and they're made out of Kentucky. It's almost like barbecue tobacco. It's really interesting. So the Italians used to buy, well, they still do, they buy Kentucky a Kentucky tobacco, and bring it over to Italy, and they roll it up, and they're really, really inexpensive. You're supposed to cut them in half and then smoke the two halves, but they're fine just smoking them one side to the other. Those have a massive black licorice flavor to them, in my opinion. Once you get bit by the medicinal flavor, it will be, believe it or not, the flavor that you seek out the most. And if you don't have a source for aged Cubans, it will become what we call the unicorn flavor. Unicorns are obviously very rare in this universe, right? So when someone brings you an aged Cuban, you will get excited, as long as this person knows how to, age it like I was saying. Now, the other thing about smoking cigars in general, but most definitely Cuban cigars, is you see how we're outside. And the foot smoke coming off the end of my cigar is just kind of floating away. That's not how you typically want to smoke a Cuban cigar. You want to be inside someplace, preferably with very controlled airflow and having very little airflow. Last thing you want to do is pay, $20 or more for a cigar, and every time you puff it, the smoke's just flying away from your face. You want the room to fill up with the smoke. My buddy and I smoke in his garage, and we hotbox it, right? We close the door, except for in summertime. But in summertime, the wind's usually pretty still. So we'll smoke, a couple sticks, and then, break to go to the restroom and come back into this garage, having had the door remain sealed the entire time. And the smell in the room is one of the most amazing smells. It doesn't smell like any of the flavors you're getting off the cigar. It's a separate smell that's in the room. And it is, if you could put it in a bottle, you could make a ton of money. But even in summertime, when a really nice stick comes around, we'll shut that damn door and sweat it out with these sticks, Now, the one thing that happens in the New World side of things, just to kind of, again, dismiss some of the myths on that side, is that folks will, and I first discovered this in alcohol. I'm not a drinker really, but you'll have people that want to seem posh, right? And so they come into a bar and they demand this name brand alcohol, hold their head up high, like they are drinking the best shit on planet Earth. The big one was Patron, the tequila, right? I have an old story where a friend of mine was in a bar and the lead singer of Creed came in and made a huge stink about how he only drinks Patron tequila. As if that is like some super duper top shelf choice he's making when there's like thousands of tequilas out there you can choose. Something like hand blown bottles and shit. Same with whiskeys and bourbons. If you know the name off the top of your head and it's in every single bar, you're nowhere close to top shelf. You're nowhere near that fine liqueur or liquor that you might be drinking, right? Same thing goes for cigars, in the New World especially. Cubans, honestly, have to say, the Cubans are so consistent as long as the person who got them and brought them back from Cuba didn't abuse them, kept the box sealed or what have you, right? You're allowed to bring back several $100s worth of Cubans now. I think it's like $800 worth of Cubans you can bring back in your luggage, which is what happens with the sticks around here. But there are some gigantic brands in the New World realm where people swear up and down by them. And as soon as you know anything about cigars, especially if you've delved into this Cuban side of things and you start enjoying what I believe to be the finer side of life in the Cuban experience, in the cigar experience, you'll get back to some of these New Worlds that are selling for $20, $30, $40 a stick, and you're like, you guys are idiots. Like, you are smoking essentially coal sticks, patting yourself on the back like you know anything about cigars. In fact, some of the more expensive cigars out there in the New World realm are such pepper bombs, like you'll smoke it and your whole mouth is like tingling. Pepper is one of the most inexpensive, cliche things to have a cigar be dominant in, right? Now, you might get a little pepper out of a Macanudo, but it's beautifully balanced as an additional flavor, not the dominant flavor. But there are, put this way, there's a brand of cigar out there that sounds a lot like Patron, and they're nicely made, but I mean, I haven't had one that I thought was worth $10, you know. So if you're brand new to cigars and you don't want to have your face blown off and you want a New World, because that's all you can get a hold of, get a Macanudo and just worry-free. Smoke it slowly until you build up your rapport. Again, don't inhale, okay? The second you inhale a cigar, in most cases, if you weren't like a cigar or cigarette smoker before, it's it'll set your lungs on fire. So it's a beautifully self-regulating art. But there's a brand of cigar out there called Fuente, and it's the Fuente family, and they make probably the finest New World cigars on planet Earth. Their top brand / line of cigars is called the Opus X, and they have several different Opus X configurations, and I mean several. They have a blue label Opus X that is my personal favorite on that, but honestly, any Opus X, except for the super heavy ones, right? I don't like a lot of strength. They're all pretty remarkable. They have a line of inexpensive Fuentes called the 858s. I believe there's 4 different sticks inside the 858 realm. Some have like the Maduro wrapper, which is the darker wrapper. They have a lighter Connecticut wrapper. They've got the, I think it's called the Cameroon, the green one, and another variation of kind of a medium one. They're all lightweight cigars. One of the biggest misnomers that was heavily documented at the turn of the 20th century, from the 18th or from the 19th to the 20th century, so about 1910 or so, was that all cigars were dark back in the day, and they weren't all heavy. So there's this total misconception that a dark cigar is going to hit you in the pants, right? Now, some are intensely powerful when they're dark, and I mean, like, I can't get through an inch of some of these cigars. But the Fuente 858s, which you can get online in a box, probably around $4 to $5 if you bought a box. If you get them out of a store, they're anywhere from about $8.50 to $10 in California, usually closer to $8.50. I could smoke them all day if I had to, right? Because they're not heavy. The other nice thing is, it's just like when you eat food. How many of you have to eat out every day? You know, you have a lunch, either you work at home like I do, or you just have to. You have to leave your company and go out to eat. And then you have these restaurants, and you've eaten at all of them, and you're like, God, I just don't want to eat at any of these restaurants anymore. That same thing happens to your cigar lines. So my way of combating that in the eating realm is to eat at a couple places for several days in a row, maybe even 4 or 5 weeks in a row. And then when I switch, it's a special thing. And then I don't go back to the previous one for another 2 or 3 weeks, and then rotating through in that realm. Same thing with cigars. It just depends on sort of your preference, of course. I personally don't like to smoke 2 amazing aged Cubans in a row, like 2 days in a row, because it is such an amazing experience for me personally that to do that every single day would eventually get to the point where it's not special. Until you back off for a month or so, and then you come back to it, and it'll be a mind-blowing experience again. I'm in the sweet spot on this cigar, man. It is beautiful. There's no medicinal flavor whatsoever, but it does have a bit of a sweetness to it at this stage. H. Upmann are just fantastic sticks. The taste is almost guaranteed to be in a Cuban cigar, right? I say almost because there's obviously folks that age cigars improperly. I haven't ever smoked a cigar right out of the box that didn't have a wonderful Cuban, sort of the hay tobacco flavor, like this one I'm smoking right now. It's just fantastic. The reason why I'm telling you that is that you might go and try to confirm this information with some of your buddies who smoke a lot. If you get a knee-jerk reaction that Cubans suck, you can almost always do a little bit of poking and prodding around in their history and say, well, what do you smoke? And they're usually either one of 2 hemispheres. They're smoking really cheap New World cigars, which the cheaper you go, the more you get the pepper bombs and your really strong tobacco stuff, tobacco flavors. Or they're smoking the higher end stuff, and which is also very loud, but probably has a lot of good body in it. And when they switch over to the subtlety of a Cuban, they don't get it. For anybody who's like a Macanudo addict, which they're out there, and they're pretty expensive cigars because they're so well constructed, they just burn perfectly, right? Go see my cigar episode for the anatomy of a cigar and a lot of the terminology and what have you. But they're able to move into Cubans and experience it, typically. So the younger you are, I think the more that you have the ability to taste things more profoundly. You know, I'm in my 40s and I still taste a Cuban beautifully. So I think that it just depends on your palate, of course. But, with cigar smoking, especially if you hang out in lounges or around guys who have smoked for a long time, there's this cliquey thing that can happen with any devotion like that, and then people say, oh, you don't want to like that, you got to like this. Sports teams, to television shows, to what actress is hot or whatever. It's important that if you're going to get into this, and especially spend the money to be in it, because it's a devotion, right? You're going to have to probably, unless you're really wealthy, sidetrack something else in your life that costs money to have this experience on a routine basis, especially on a day-to-day basis. And like I said in my initial episode on cigars, the biggest thing that goes on is that regardless of how much your closest friends smoke, they typically will not tell you anything about how to do something quote-unquote right until you screw it up in front of them. It's a weird thing. I like to think that if you invited your buddy to go fly fishing and he's never been fly fishing, that you would have the decency to explain it to your friend before they try to get out there and catch a fish with one of the most complex methods on planet Earth, right? So again, if you're worried about the basics, go over to the cigar episode. I'll definitely put it down in the description so you can find it. Maybe I'll do that little hot link inside the video. I never do. But that'll get you through the basics so that the terminology's there, the steps are there, how to pick a cigar for yourself is there. This is the episode you watch to understand the investment of a Cuban cigar, right? Now, once you figure out what your palate is and what you like, whether you like the medicinal flavor or not, or the bean flavor or the hay or the leather or all that stuff, right? Once you figure out what you like and you find a source to get your Cubans, especially you guys in Europe, you're super lucky. We've got a couple listeners, one in, I think, Edinburgh, one in Glasgow, and one in England. I'm not sure what city he lives in. But we have folks that can just walk into stores and buy them all day long. My buddy's cigar review page / YouTube channel. He also has Instagram and that kind of stuff if you're into that stuff. But if you want to hear whether or not a cigar is living up to the hype inside the Cuban realm or not, he's a fantastic resource. He even has videos on dissecting counterfeit cohibas. Now, with the counterfeiting, just to kind of end this on sort of a technical note, the counterfeiting is just like money. If something has a really high value, it gets counterfeited. If it doesn't have a high value, it doesn't get counterfeited. So one of the beautiful things about finding sort of a Cuban cigar or even a New World cigar that's sort of under that $2 chuck theory, and for those of you who don't know what that means, there was a wine, and I can't remember, it's called Charles something or other, and he had a bunch of wine. He overmade a bunch of wine in I believe it was the 90s, maybe the 21st century, but I think it was in the 90s. Anyway, made a bunch of wine, couldn't get rid of it, so he threw it out for $2 a bottle. Just so happened the vintage was impeccable, amazing. So everybody rushed out and bought all this wine up because they were getting a $2 bottle of wine that was probably worth $30. It doesn't happen a lot, but it happens every once in a while. Well, that happens in cigars as well. You will find some little sleeper where, and it's just like the vintage of a wine. So a cigar made in 2004 could be awesome, but a cigar made in 2005 by the same company has been reblended. They had some hurricanes. They've had to import tobacco from a place they don't normally mix their cigars with, blend their cigars with, and it tastes like crap. Now, what's nice is that in my lifetime drinking wine, I no longer drink it anymore, but I used to be into it like every other person who's into it. The drastic difference between vintages was ridiculous. Like the finest wine I think I ever had that was below $30 was it was a Cabernet, and it's in a California vineyard, and I'm just going blank on this, but the 86 was unbelievable. I stumbled into it. But the 87 was awful. 87 was tannin, full of tannins, and gave you a big headache, and it was just awful. And so it really killed it. Like, I never went back to that brand. With a cigar, you typically will not have this complete disaster even if it's got a bad harvest. Either they won't release the cigar in general, which is very rare, or the blend is actually pretty decent on a Cuban side of things. Now, with New Worlds, I had a cigar, and I'll leave the name out because they may fix this, and I might meet them one day or something. But it was the stick that, if you ever see my season 1 thumbnail, I've got this stick in my hand, and at the time I was making season 1, it's like a vanilla flavored wrapper. It's crazy, and it's not covered in anything. It's just, it ferments that way. It was beautiful, and I smoked box after box of that stuff. And then about 2 or 3 years later, when it got super duper popular, they must have had a problem because they started turning into tar sticks, and it was just gross. The second cigar I filmed in my second season, it started off with like a buttery tip, and it was just amazing, and then it turned into like this ashy thing. Now it's kind of halfway between what it was and what it is, in between the bad one and the good one. So they're kind of recovering. But that's the excitement of finding a really nice cigar brand that's awesome. And you can go in, just like in a winery, you can go into a humidor and experiment with cheaper cigars if you really want to get under $10, and you try it out. Once you find one that you like, be smart enough to get a box of them and put them away, right? But when it comes to counterfeit Cubans, especially, the Cuban government wants you to have Cuban cigars. They don't want you to buy some crazy New World knockoff of their smoke. A lot of smoke shops will sell you a counterfeit cigar. You'll take it home, you'll smoke it, you're halfway through, and you realize, this ain't no Cohiba. And you come back to the proprietor, and they'll say, but was it good? And it might be way better than a normal New World cigar. So it's kind of half between New World and Cuban. The idea is that he sold you an illegal cigar if you're in America, so there's no place you can really go to say you bought a legal product and so you're part of the crime, right? Which is such a ridiculous notion, right? Again, it's sort of like Amsterdam's drug rules. We can actually import them in from Cuba and smoke them, but if you import them in and sell them to anybody, boy, you're in jail, right? It's just nuts, right? So, but all the boxes from Cuba have a green sort of looks like a money type design label on it that actually closes off the box lid. So the box is sealed, but this label's underneath the wrapping on the box to make sure if you open this thing, this seal's going to break. On that seal, they've got a little holograph background and a big number on it. And you can go to the Cuban, I forgot the name of the site, Dave talks about all the time. But you go to the site at Cuba and the Cuban government, type this number in, and they will tell you what's supposed to be inside that box. And it is amazing how many times that label is forged. You'll pop it open. You're looking at what you think is a box of Cohibas, but you look up the label and it's supposed to be H. Upman's or something totally different, right? Now, one of the other ways you can get Cubans that's a little unorthodox, and there's 2 different versions of this. For those of you who travel to Mexico, they will have a location like as I'm told, a bar, and inside the bar is a little cubic 10-foot place. And there's a guy there with a bunch of tobacco, and he is rolling Cuban cigars in Mexico. The way they talk about this is that the Cuban government owns the 10-foot by 10-foot space that this person's working in. technically. I don't know how they pull that off paperwork-wise. Seems a little silly to even say that. But they'll roll these sort of Mexican Cuban cigars. Now, I have smoked dozens and dozens of these things. It's a very interesting smoke. It is by no means the traditional flavor that you get from a Cuban cigar, but it is also much improved over New World cigars. So it's sort of this in-between cigar between a typical Cuban proper cigar and a New World cigar. There's also places in foreign countries, this doesn't happen in America because of our stupid embargo, but I think Canada does this. There's a bunch of places in Europe that do the same exact thing. I do not believe that they have this weird we own the land underneath your feet thing, but people will buy big bundles of Cuban tobacco and they will roll it in your backyard. It's interesting. I guess you could do it literally, rent them for a party. So if you have any friends traveling abroad outside the United States of America, they are allowed by law, by American law now, to buy, I think it's $800 worth of cigars, which in some countries that wouldn't be a lot of cigars, and in some countries it'd be a ton of cigars. So if you're interested in getting Cubans and you don't want to, and you're in America, you can have one of your friends. If you have a friend that's a flight attendant, they can easily go into the duty-free shops and grab you a box or even just a few sticks. Make sure if they're not bringing it back in a box that they at least bring it back in some cellophane bag, and that the cellophane bag isn't stuffed inside some, rough and tough suitcase or in a pocket or in a backpack or something where it's going to get messed around. Because every time a cigar is bumped, you run the risk of breaking the wrapper. And once you break the wrapper, you could run into situations where you'll have, again, a little side chimney out of the side of your cigar. The chimneys can be fixed a couple different ways. You can hold it like a flute and literally like pinch the hole with your finger every time you take a drag if it's closer to the band. That's a pain in the ass. They do make this adhesive, the same exact, I think it's some sort of vegetable oil that's, it's the adhesive that they use in the cigar rolling plants all around the world to get the wrapper to hang on and to seal. That's how they put the caps on, right? You can buy that in a little dinky bottle. It's about half the size of a cinnamon bottle. And you have to shake it up because it's got a sedimentary thing in it. You shake it up, shake it up, shake it up. You pull it out, and it's got a little brush, just like a fingernail polish brush. And you just brush right over the hole. Or if your wrappers come off, you go underneath the wrapper, and it's just like glue. You just put it back down. Works great. One of the other things you can run into that I don't believe I covered in my cigar episode, maybe I did, but it's important for Cubans especially, because you don't typically know where the Cubans come from. Again, if you have a friend that goes to Cuba or goes to a really nice cigar shop and they're taking a direct flight back, right? They didn't buy on the first day, stay 2 weeks, and then come back to you. Your humidification in the cigar and the dryness of a cigar can contribute to it becoming so blocked from the opening to your cap where you're putting it in your mouth that you'll have a block stick. In my experience, when you get a block stick in the New World brand, you're most often dealing with a branch, like a part of the leaf, like the stem of the leaf is in there, or just some objects inside the stick. And that's a big bummer because it's very difficult to correct that problem besides cutting your stick in half and hoping that one of the two halves is not blocked. With a Cuban, if you get a blocked Cuban, it is 99% of the time simply due to its humidification and its dryness or over wetness, right? If you have a lot of moisture in your cigar, you basically have water molecules blocking the pull. A pull on a cigar should be effortless. I mean, it should be just like you barely have anything obstructing your breath. Also, until you at least get down to like this last third here, the smoke should be very cool inside your mouth. If it starts getting really hot and your cigar is barely burned any, you might have a tunnel, and that's very rare in a Cuban. But when they roll up those leaves, they're rolling them in a roll, and so you can get a little hole inside the cigar. It's a very rare situation, but fire goes right down that hole. And there's very little you can do to stop that from burning all the way down to where the hole stops, right? It most likely only goes, like maybe a third, horrible situation, 2/3 down the cigar. When you have gone to the labor, especially in America, to get a hold of a Cuban cigar, you probably want a little stick or a little this little tool. There's one made in Orange County, and I can't remember the freaking name of it, but they're little metal rods with little razor blades on the end, and they're jagged towards the pullout. So it's like an arrowhead. Very meticulous little tiny things. But I think one's called like Clear Draw or something like that. But if you have a totally block stick and you're thinking, man, I can't do this, my mouth's hurting because I'm pulling on this thing too much, I've got a good opening in my cigar, you guillotine, like maybe if you did a punch or you got a little hole in there, you did a V cut and it's hard, I always get out the guillotine and go ahead and chop off, any tapering on the end of the cigar, just to make sure I'm not struggling with just the tip, right? But you take these little sticks, they're metal, and you have to be very careful. You just push it directly in the center of the back of the cigar, and you need to kind of rotate it to make sure you don't go sideways on this little poker. Because if you go sideways, it'll pop out the side of your cigar, and you've got to mend it really with that glue stuff. But at that point, you've kind of destroyed your cigar a little bit. But as you're pushing it in, you just rotate. Make sure you keep even. If you start going off, just pull it back and kind of readjust it. You get it all the way till it's at the little handle. And then very carefully and very slowly, you pull it out. And it's going to take a bunch of the cigar, not a bunch, but it'll take a fair amount of the cigar tobacco in the center of your cigar and pull it out with the poker. If there's some obstruction in there in a New World cigar, it typically brings the branch with it or whatever is in there. But sometimes if you're in a rush, and you have time to rehumidify it and clean it up inside your own humidor, this is a technique to get around it. So you get a few tools to help you out. I think it's called Perfect Draw. That's what it's called. The one made in Orange County here. But sometimes you'll be, again, what you want to do is if you get a cigar and it's blocked, like you got a box and you pull one out and it's blocked, sometimes it's just that stick. Very rarely it's the whole box. But at that point, you want to get it into your humidor. If you want just normal average humidification and temperature, you just let it go room temperature and you put it at 69 degrees humidification to about 72. 72 is starting to become really, really popular, just so that you know. 69 was sort of each cigar needs probably a little bit different humidification, so in the middle, 69 is good. The reason why I'm making this video is because once you get into it, and you get into the subtleties of Cuban cigars, all those dudes that told you that Cubans suck, they're still your buddies, but you don't go to them for any more advice, right? Because they're hooked on Coors Light. They hate microbreweries. They would prefer a Big Mac over a burger you cook in your backyard. It's just that kind of dude. And it's okay if they're that way. It's just, if you want to have something that's more meticulous, you're spending the kind of money that it takes to smoke cigars, why not have the best experience on planet Earth? And if you're tenacious, you can really find unbelievable sticks between $10 and $15 American. So translate that to your currency. There is a lot of taxation on cigars because they get blamed for being cigarettes. Any item that's a luxury item, most countries create taxes on those items. It's just the way it is. Remember the tea tax, right? Tea is probably the cheapest flavor additive to water on this planet. And to have it cost a lot of money is sort of the funniest thing on planet Earth, right? When you go to a restaurant, my buddy used to own a restaurant, and I'd ask him, I said, how much is it to get like a large Coke? Like, what does it cost you, syrup and water and all that stuff? And he's like, about 8 cents. So he goes, that's where I make a lot of my money, is people drinking, something with their meal. I said, what does it cost for tea? He goes, oh, that's free. He goes, it takes barely any tea, and I make a gigantic vat of it. And he goes, maybe a penny for the biggest drink you can possibly get a hold of. So with Cubans, you want to get your money's worth. Anyhow, I hope this was very useful for those of you who have sort of been sitting on the fence. You haven't smoked a Cuban, but you'd really like to know whether or not it's worth your investment. I think it is 100,000%. I wouldn't start out with a Cohiba. because you want that to be, one, you want it to be an authentic Cohiba, and you want that experience to be very rewarding. And I think that going in and, it's like there are, there's cameras out there that cost a ton of money, but you wouldn't want to buy it on your first camera because you won't appreciate its features. You might even know how to use them. Same thing with the Cohiba, right? I barely smoke a Cohiba, because I find that my mind is consistently blown by anything that's just simply aged. This is not your typical Deep Thoughts episode, so if you're new to the show, branching out into the other episodes is going to seem very disorienting. If you have any further questions, there's probably a couple places you could go. One, obviously, if you ask me a question in the comments section, I'll do my best to answer your question. But if you really want to get a super duper expert opinion about something, definitely go over to my buddy Dave's show and watch his videos, ask him questions. He's always available to answer your queries. Same thing with his Instagram. And again, he can save you a ton of money if you find that your palates are similar, because he's incredibly accurate in my opinion. Anyway, if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. There's audio, video, a locked Facebook group, and a Patreon page. The shop is also still there. My shirts are still available out there. Pretty interesting. Need to come up with some new designs. I've got one I'm dreaming up right now, which will be kind of fun, I think. Famous last words. But anyway, until then, until next time, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next episode of Deep Thoughts. Over now.